Yo, what is up? It's JJ, and this is another episode of Frame Explain. And in this one, I'll be talking about the images that I created for former SF Mayor Ed Lee. And we'll kind of just start off with the final image that I produced and edited. And this is him in his campaign office back in 2011. And so basically, almost a decade later, it still lives in my portfolio just because, one, it's Mayor Ed Lee. And two, I really love the elements that kind of made up this particular image. But this one and then the headshot of him along with a few others were actually published in a magazine called Hyphen. And that's where we're going to start off as I go back and kind of explain as far as how I came into the position of creating these images. So in the early 2010s, I was actually one of three photo editors for an SF-based magazine called Hyphen, Asian American Unabridged. And it was a really great opportunity and experience to be part of something like this because one, magazines right now are really not alive because of the online publishing world, but two, just kind of learning the in and outs of it, the terminology involving producing a magazine. And then of course, just the talent pool. A lot of us were, the bulk of us were volunteers, and just kind of getting that experience for me at least was priceless. So you'll see my name right over here, along with Damien and Patrick, who of course are great photographers as well, which was in our department, so to speak, was led by Andrea Lowe, who's a director of photography at the time, and is a really great, photographer. So really can't expect, less from these people who are involved in the magazine. And a quick back story, or at least some info on Ed Lee. He is the first Asian American mayor of San Francisco, an attorney turned mayor. He actually became the mayor interim, that is, when Gavin Newson left his position to become the governor of California, which he is still today. And he also successfully was elected when he ran, and he served from 2011 to 2017, which because unfortunately he had a heart attack in December 2017 and passed away at age 65. Here's a CNN article, giving a quick backstory on him, and including a tweet even from like Nancy Pelosi and other respectable politicians who give their condolences to Mayor Ed Lee. So moving on to the shoot, actually was asked, or rather I think a bunch of us were asked in terms of photo editors, if we were interested in photographing Ed Lee. And I don't know, and I don't remember if it's because of the availabilities or whatnot, but I for sure jumped on the chance, and I guess I won the bid or just got the opportunity. And so the shoot in itself was on September 2nd, 2011. And the scope was to go with a writer who's actually also the co-founder of Hyphen, Chris Fan, and do basically behind the scenes, take photos of the office, behind the scenes of their interview, that is, take photos of the office, and then of course produce portraits of Mayor Ed Lee. And again, even though he was interim mayor at the time, all these people are always going to be busy. And so I was basically asked if I can do this portrait less than 5, if anything, 2 minutes to produce the portraits. And you'll see with the timestamps how quickly I was able to get the shots. So, Chris and I arrive at Ed Lee's campaign office on Market. And the first thing, of course, was kind of scouting. So let me kind of go ahead and show a little bit as far as what the scout looked like. So basically we were, on Market Street, and right now I'm just kind of looking around, right? So we're of course ahead of time of our scheduled interview, or rather Chris's interview with Ed Lee. And I'm just kind of looking around, just kind of seeing like, where can I actually position him? Where can I take his photo? Again, you can kind of see how the time is back in 2011, this iMac. His tagline, Ed Lee gets it done. So kind of like the life of a campaign office, pretty bare bones. But I did see this wall, this mural that was being painted, and I unfortunately don't know who was creating this mural. But right away, I was like, this is perfect. I don't completely understand all of the symbols in it at the time, but I got the sense that, you know, rising sun, also unfinished because things are being built. So I was like, all right, cool. Let's go ahead and just use this as the backdrop. So let's just jump into, oh, and I don't know if I did already, but thanks, Chris, for attaching me and having me tag along with your interview of Mayor Ed Lee. So this is me photographing Ed Lee. I can't remember. I can actually if I look into it. So looks like we did the portrait first before Chris's interview. So I essentially had less than 5 minutes to take Ed Lee, direct him to the wall, letting him know and give him the confidence that, hey, this backdrop looks really cool. Let's go ahead and do our portraits here. Gear at the time, if you cared, was an APS-C Sony A700. It's a 12 megapixel camera. The lens that I was using almost exclusively at that time was a Sony Zeiss 2470 2.8. And then the flashes I was using were my old school Minolta 5600 flashes that I was triggering wirelessly with Alien Bees transmitters and receiver. So it was like a hack that I made to make these hot shoe flashes work wirelessly. So, you know, at the time you couldn't adjust the power, you know, wirelessly via remote. So I had to just kind of set it, adjust it again on the back of the flash and, you know, take a shot from there. So also the setup was just shooting through a 32-inch umbrella. And then you'll see over here that I had an additional one gridded for a hair light. So this is actually Chris, who's actually taking the behind the scene photos. And as far as the time, you'll see that from the EXIF data that the first shot that I took of Ed Lee was at 4:33 and 4 seconds in the afternoon. And the last frame was basically not even a minute later. So that was my window of getting Ed Lee, posing him rapidly, ensuring that I got the frame that I wanted, and then telling Chris and telling Ed, like, hey, we got the shot. Cool. Let's go on and move on to the interview. So now let's kind of hop into Lightroom, kind of just show you exactly what I took during that day. I believe at this point already, I did delete any of the bad photos. So these are literally 36 photos that were essentially usable. So I don't remember what the raw takes were, but or rather how many shots I took that did not work. So you'll see that here's a time. So at 4:13, so again, the first photo that I took of him was at 4:33. So when we arrive, I guess I was just scouting immediately. I asked Chris, hey Chris, can you be a stand-in? And I'm just gonna dial in my settings from here. So you'll see that I have the portrait, and then of course the landscape orientation. So I asked Chris, hey, go ahead and stand here real quick. Let me just dial in my stuff so that way once he arrives or once we get him, we'll be good to go. So here's some photos that I took, just some Candids around the office of things, you know, people working essentially. And then now let's kind of get into our first frame, which is on taken at 4:33 and that 4 seconds in the afternoon. And you'll just see how I kind of figure out here, getting the angle, getting the lighting. So obviously this is a little bit too bright. Settings, if you're curious, was 1/100th of a second at f8. Power is probably half. I think I typically shoot at half power on my strobes at the time, so the recycle time will be quick enough. So you'll see here that some of them are okay, obviously kind of blown out, but again, you can kind of dial this back in post, like in Lightroom. This is a great smiling one. And here we go. So these are the ones that I essentially chose. It was this one, right? Oops. Yep. So it was frame 19, or I renamed these, so I don't know exactly the original, but 19 was the favorite one. A little bit wider one. And then now the behind the scenes as they had an interview. And that's Chris. just taking some Candids. And the cool thing, or rather even at that time, by the way, so luckily no audio is being captured here, but you know, I would say nowadays, if people are talking and they're recording video, obviously you would want to be incognito. So Sony cameras and other cameras nowadays have like silent mode, right? So no one would be hearing the shutter actually being actuated. But and here, you know, it was still a DSLR, so hearing that flap, the may have been a little bit distracting. So that's why I only took a few, and then kind of just let them finish the interview. And that was pretty much it. These are the last frames I guess I took, you know, on the way out. Now let's just jump into the edit in itself. So again, I kind of mentioned it already, but one reason why that I love this backdrop, because it wasn't unfinished, it's exactly for that reason. The sun symbolizing, you know, light, all that stuff. But then the part that I really like was, sure, it's a colorful background, but if you look at it, you may be like, oh, it's, you know, this area, the painting is not done yet. There's still masking tape. And it was exactly for that reason, because Edley had just started as the interim mayor, and is now running at this time. And of course is trying to build something new, right? With his him being a mayor. So the way that I've worked in the past, and actually still do this today, is I do a combination of a fake HDR, where I'm editing the photo twice and then combining it, right? So you'll see that this is the raw image, and then there's a layer that I called HDR. So at 100%, what I'm doing is I'm lifting all the blacks, but I'm also pulling down the highlights. And what you get at the moment is a very like unrealistic, you know, HDR looking image. And a lot of, like, for example, real estate photographers do this, because if you take a photo of a room and there's a really great view, the camera is not as dynamic as our eyes, where we can balance that. So for an image, you just have to pull back, you know, and blend two photos together to expose the outside and also the inside. So for portraits, I actually do the same, you know, technique as what real estate photographers do. So that is the after combining, right? So this is before. If you look at the shadows here, which is actually not that bad, but my style then was just lifting those shadows and then combining that together. The next step that I did was, there's an action called O Snap, and it just provides some contrast. So here's the before and an after. And there's I believe the actions, by the way, were totally rad actions. Pretty sure they're still there, but again, these actions were used like more than a decade ago, and I still use them today. And then Fuji adds a little bit more vibrance and saturation. And then let me just zoom in right here so you can just see the skin tones. So again, this is a 12 megapixel file back in 2011. So the resolution, sharpness, and all that is, I would say, not as good as today's cameras, but hey, they still turn out pretty good. So if you look here, this is the before. And I just want you to look at the skin tones that have a little bit more red and orange in it. And what I ended up doing was using an adjustment layer where I just kind of pull back. Okay, that's before and that's after. So I'm just cooling down those tones, because when you're increasing saturation and vibrance on the image, especially if you do it globally, obviously the skin tones as well will be as vibrant and more saturated. So for this one, I'm just pulling back down. That's the after, very subtle, but I'm sharpening the image. That is before. Let me zoom in. This is already at 300%, by the way, which no one is looking at 300% close, but that's before, and then that's after. So again, typically for print and web, because of compression, you do want to sharpen images before they're published. So the only thing is, of course, just trying to balance as far as how much sharpening that you would apply. And really the last thing was I cropped it. So that is the after. So let me show you before, where you can kind of see this bottom part right over here. And then I cropped it. So also by cropping it, this was closer to having him on the thirds, right? The rule of thirds. So having him on this side. And that was pretty much it. So this photo along with the smiling one, and you'll see here that I for sure pulled back the highlights because this was, you know, the before, the raw shot. So pull back in terms of skin tone. Probably could have done a little bit more. I'm pretty sure the data is still there. And then yeah, and then it accompanied this article that Chris had wrote September 7th. So that was only just 5 days later, right? So the article was Edley thinks San Francisco is worth it. So feel free to read this article. I'm linking it in the description, and you'll see here that they start off with that image. And again, 2011, I feel like nowadays the websites are more dynamic. They're showing more of imagery, definitely taking use of all this white space. But back then, I guess they were just dropping the images like this. So again, some of the images that I kind of showed earlier, and then they closed it with personally my favorite image from this. So I hope this this episode, peeling back again the process of it, kind of the pressures of shooting a politician with a very limited time, kind of gives more insight. And if you have any questions, you know, in terms of the process, anything about post-production or even the pre-production side, let me know. Like the video, and obviously you guys do subscribe, because having more videos like this, I think, not just helps me because it's reflecting back, but hopefully, you know, it's helping other people as well in terms of their photography and portraits. Cheers.